Welcome to the no man's memory, where forgotten battles become legends. The three destroyers entered the Strait of Hormuz under the cover of darkness. Their navigation lights shimmered faintly across the black water as they moved through one of the most dangerous shipping lanes on Earth. A narrow corridor bordered by the Iranian coastline on one side and endless open sea on the other. Somewhere beyond the darkness, tiny radar signatures had already begun to move. At first, the contacts seemed harmless. Small, fast-moving blips weaving between civilian ships, disappearing behind commercial tankers, then reappearing moments later. But the crews aboard the American destroyers knew exactly what they were seeing. Iran's feared swarm boats had arrived. For years, these small attack craft had harassed larger warships throughout the Persian Gulf. Fast, cheap, and difficult to track, they operated like insects instead of a traditional navy. They would appear suddenly, fire rockets or missiles, then vanish back toward the Iranian coastline before larger ships could fully react. But tonight was different. The destroyers entering the strait had not arrived by accident. According to later reports, the entire mission had been designed to provoke exactly this kind of encounter. The United States was no longer simply defending shipping lanes. It was trying to expose the hidden network behind the attacks. Under an operation later referred to as Silent Tide, three Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the USS Valor, USS Sentinel, and USS Archer, were deliberately sent into the narrow waterway. To Iranian observers, they appeared vulnerable. Large warships trapped deep inside a confined maritime choke point. In reality, the ships were bait. Far above the Gulf, an invisible network of radar aircraft, surveillance drones, reconnaissance satellites, and intelligence platforms was already waiting for the first shot to be fired. Iran's swarm strategy was built around one simple truth. In a direct confrontation, its navy could never defeat the United States ship for ship. American destroyers carried advanced radar systems, guided missiles, layered defenses, and highly trained crews prepared for modern naval warfare. A head-on battle would have been suicide. So the Revolutionary Guard Navy created a different strategy. Instead of relying on massive warships, it invested in speed, confusion, and overwhelming numbers. Hundreds of small attack boats, many built from lightweight fiberglass, were spread across hidden coastal bases, fishing docks, and isolated island outposts throughout the Persian Gulf. Some carried rocket launchers. Others mounted heavy machine guns or anti-ship missiles. Individually, they looked insignificant, but their strength came from operating together. A swarm never attacks from one direction. Dozens of boats could emerge simultaneously from fishing harbors, commercial traffic routes, or hidden coastal inlets. To radar crews aboard American destroyers, separating civilian traffic from hostile craft became nearly impossible. That confusion was intentional. Many of the vessels used in these attacks were technically civilian boats secretly modified for military operations. From a distance, they blended perfectly into the dense maritime traffic flowing through the Strait of Hormuz every day. That made identifying attackers extremely difficult. A rocket strike could happen within seconds, and by the time American forces reacted, the attackers were often already disappearing back into civilian traffic or racing toward the Iranian coastline. The swarm was designed not only to attack, but to vanish. Eventually, the United States realized it faced a growing problem. Iranian swarm tactics were becoming harder to predict, harder to trace, and increasingly dangerous for both military ships and commercial tankers. Destroyers could defend themselves against isolated attacks, but preventing strikes before they happened required something far more difficult: finding where the swarm originated. That became the true purpose of Silent Tide. Instead of chasing hostile boats blindly across the Gulf, the Navy decided to reverse the entire equation. If the swarm could not be located reliably, then it would need to be drawn out into the open. The USS Valor, USS Sentinel, and USS Archer moved deeper into the Strait of Hormuz under the appearance of a normal freedom of navigation patrol. Publicly, nothing about the mission seemed unusual. Privately, the destroyers had become deliberate targets. To Iranian commanders observing from radar stations and coastal bases, the American ships appeared exposed. Large warships navigating through a narrow corridor surrounded by potential ambush positions. Exactly the kind of target the swarm doctrine had been designed to exploit. But the destroyers were never alone. High above the Persian Gulf, an invisible surveillance web was already active. Early warning aircraft orbited far beyond visual range, while reconnaissance drones monitored the coastline continuously. Satellites passed overhead collecting movement data from ports, islands, and hidden staging areas across southern Iran. The operation itself was deceptively simple. Wait for Iran to strike first, then use the attack to expose the entire network behind it. The confrontation began almost exactly as American planners predicted. Small radar contacts started converging toward the destroyers from multiple directions. Fast boats weaved between civilian vessels and hugged the edges of commercial shipping lanes. Then rockets appeared over the water. Combat alarms echoed across the destroyers as radar crews locked onto incoming threats. Defensive systems activated immediately, while electronic warfare teams searched for missile guidance signals. But while the crews focused on defending their ships, another operation unfolded silently in the background. The United States had never intended to merely survive the attack. The real objective was identification. The moment rockets and drones launched, surveillance systems began tracing their flight paths backward toward their points of origin. Spy satellites tracked launch flashes from the Iranian coastline, while airborne radar aircraft monitored movements near ports and islands. Signals intelligence platforms intercepted communications between Revolutionary Guard naval units coordinating the strike. For years, the swarm had hidden behind confusion and ambiguity. Now it was leaving a trail. Within minutes, American intelligence teams began identifying key launch locations connected to the attacks. One island quickly emerged as a major staging point for drone and speedboat operations. Another coastal naval hub revealed itself as the central command center directing Revolutionary Guard activity throughout the Strait of Hormuz. Additional launch signatures pointed toward smaller coastal towns heavily linked to missile deployments and fast attack craft operations. The trap had worked. Iran had attacked the destroyers, and in doing so, exposed the structure of the swarm itself. For years, the Mosquito fleet operated like a shadow, fast enough to strike, elusive enough to disappear before retaliation could organize properly. But once launch sites were mapped and communications analyzed, the United States was no longer dealing with isolated attacks. It was staring at an organized operational network. At the center of that network stood heavily fortified islands positioned directly inside the Strait of Hormuz. From those locations, attack boats and drones could move rapidly into shipping lanes, strike targets, then retreat back toward protected coastal territory within minutes. American analysts soon realized the system was far more sophisticated than a collection of random speedboats. Iran had transformed its coastline into a layered, asymmetric battlefield. Part naval fortress, part missile corridor, part civilian camouflage network. Hidden docks and fishing harbors doubled as military launch points. Civilian-looking boats quietly transformed into armed attack craft under cover of darkness. And once American planners understood the geography behind the swarm, the next phase became unavoidable. Finding the nest only mattered if you were prepared to destroy it. To understand why the United States considered the swarm such a serious threat, you first have to understand the logic behind the Mosquito fleet itself. Iran never intended to win a traditional naval war. Its strategy was designed to make traditional naval superiority far less effective inside the confined waters of the Persian Gulf. Large destroyers rely on radar coverage, missile range, and layered defenses. But inside the narrow corridors of the Strait of Hormuz, many of those advantages shrink dramatically. Fast attack boats operating close to land can appear suddenly from multiple directions, forcing a warship to track dozens of moving targets at the same time. The Revolutionary Guard Navy built its doctrine around saturation. Instead of sending one boat against a destroyer, it would send many. Some carried rockets. Others mounted machine guns or anti-ship missiles. Their objective was not always to sink a destroyer outright, but to overwhelm defensive systems through chaos, speed, and sheer volume. Many of the vessels were intentionally disguised. To an inexperienced observer, they appeared to be ordinary fishing boats or commercial craft traveling through crowded shipping lanes. Hidden beneath civilian equipment, however, were weapons, explosives, and military communication systems prepared for sudden attacks. Military analysts often compared the tactic to World War II swarm warfare. cheap, mobile, difficult to track, and highly expendable. Iran understood it could never outbuild the United States Navy. So instead, it attempted to create a battlefield where geography, confusion, and unpredictability mattered more than raw firepower. Inside the Strait of Hormuz, even the most advanced destroyers were forced to operate carefully, because the real danger was never one speedboat alone. It was the moment dozens appeared at once. The swarm boats carried more than rockets and machine guns. Some of their most dangerous weapons remained hidden beneath tarps and civilian cargo sitting on the rear decks. Naval mines. Cheap, simple, and devastatingly effective. Mines gave Iran another method of threatening the Strait of Hormuz without directly confronting the American fleet. The methods used to deploy the mines were surprisingly simple. Many of the attack boats lacked sophisticated launch systems or specialized equipment. Instead, crews relied on a crude technique sailors sometimes called the stern drop method. Once a boat reached the designated location, the crew simply pushed the mine off the rear of the vessel into the water. That simplicity made the strategy even more dangerous. A small fiberglass speedboat moving through crowded shipping traffic at night could deploy several mines within minutes, then disappear back toward the coastline before larger warships even realized what had happened. And Iran possessed thousands of these devices. Intelligence estimates suggested stockpiles ranging from 2,000 to 6,000 naval mines, including simple contact mines and advanced bottom mines resting silently on the seabed. Some exploded on direct impact. Others waited for the acoustic signature of passing ships before detonating underneath them. Inside a narrow choke point like the Strait of Hormuz, even a handful of mines could create global chaos. Tanker traffic would slow immediately. Insurance costs would skyrocket. Clearing operations could require days or even weeks, especially while under threat from drones, missiles, and swarm attacks. That was the brilliance behind the strategy. Iran did not need to sink every ship entering the strait. It only needed to make the water feel dangerous enough that global shipping slowed on its own. American planners understood that once mines entered the water, the battlefield would change completely. Mine-clearing operations would become painfully slow and extremely vulnerable to further attacks. So the United States adopted a different approach. Destroy the mine-laying capability before the mines could ever be deployed. The strategy became a textbook example of preemptive denial warfare. Instead of reacting after an attack occurred, the objective was to eliminate the enemy's ability to attack while it remained vulnerable. Intelligence assets immediately focused on identifying which vessels were involved in mine operations and where the mines themselves were stored. Reconnaissance aircraft intercepted communications along the coastline, while maritime patrol aircraft tracked vessel movement through ports and staging zones. Human intelligence sources added another layer, helping analysts distinguish ordinary civilian traffic from hidden military preparations. Once the targets were confirmed, the strikes began while many of the boats remained docked inside harbor facilities. Stationary vessels packed tightly together were far easier to destroy than fast-moving boats racing through crowded shipping lanes. Attacking them in port also reduced the risk of stray missiles causing international incidents inside one of the busiest waterways on Earth. But the operation expanded even further. American planners introduced what became known as the dual-target doctrine. Mine-laying boats were struck simultaneously alongside nearby storage depots containing the mines themselves. Even if replacement vessels survived, there would be little ordnance left available to arm them. The attacks unfolded across multiple locations almost simultaneously. Cruise missiles launched from destroyers positioned offshore. Carrier aircraft struck coastal staging areas, while heavy bombers targeted hardened underground depots using precision-guided bunker-penetrating munitions. The goal was not merely to damage the swarm fleet. It was to dismantle the entire system supporting it. Destroying ports and storage depots severely weakened the Mosquito fleet, but it did not eliminate the threat entirely. Small attack boats could still scatter across the coastline, hide among civilian traffic, or launch from improvised staging points far away from major naval facilities. To stop them completely, the United States required something capable of tracking and eliminating fast-moving targets continuously. That responsibility largely fell to the MQ-9 Reaper drone. High above the Persian Gulf, the unmanned aircraft patrolled shipping routes and coastal approaches for hours at a time, scanning the water for unusual activity. Unlike traditional aircraft rotating in and out of combat zones, the Reaper could remain overhead long enough to observe patterns emerging across the battlefield. When suspicious speedboats appeared, drone operators zoomed in using advanced targeting systems capable of tracking heat signatures and vessel movement in real time. Once a hostile target was confirmed, the drone could launch an AGM-114 Hellfire missile directly from the sky. The Hellfire missile had originally been designed for armored targets on land, but its precision guidance made it devastating against fast attack boats as well. Using laser targeting and radar guidance, the missile constantly adjusted its flight path after launch, predicting where a moving vessel would be seconds later rather than where it had previously been. That allowed it to strike boats traveling at high speed across open water, even during evasive maneuvers. Drone crews maintained continuous tracking until impact. Often, a single missile was enough to completely destroy a small attack craft instantly. Over time, relentless surveillance began turning the battlefield against the swarm itself. The same speedboats that once relied on surprise and mobility were now being hunted continuously from above. As the campaign intensified, the conflict expanded beyond swarm boats and mine layers. Larger Iranian naval vessels soon entered the fighting directly, attempting to challenge the growing American presence around the Strait of Hormuz. What followed became some of the most destructive naval clashes the region had witnessed in decades. One of the first major engagements involved an Iranian fast attack warship approaching an American surface action group. The vessel launched an anti-ship missile toward a U.S. cruiser using older missile technology acquired decades earlier before the Iranian Revolution. The missile streaked toward the American warship, but electronic countermeasures and defensive systems successfully diverted it away from the ship. The American response arrived almost instantly. Missiles and naval gunfire slammed into the attacking vessel, overwhelming it within moments. The battle became one of the earliest modern demonstrations of missile warfare between naval ships inside confined waters. A short but violent reminder of how rapidly combat could escalate inside the Persian Gulf. Soon afterward, another Iranian frigate engaged American aircraft operating nearby. Carrier-based strike aircraft and destroyers responded immediately. Missiles and bombs tore through the vessel until fires spread across the deck and secondary explosions ignited ammunition stored inside the ship itself. Eventually, the warship slipped beneath the water. Later that same day, another Iranian vessel attempted to fire a surface-to-air missile at American aircraft overhead. The pilot evaded the attack, circled back, and released a laser-guided bomb directly into the ship's exhaust structure. The internal explosion crippled the vessel almost instantly. By the end of the operation, dozens of Iranian warships, attack craft, and submarines had reportedly been destroyed or disabled within only days of fighting. But the true objective had never been destruction alone. The campaign focused on securing the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow maritime corridor responsible for transporting nearly 20% of the world's oil supply. And in the end, the operation proved something important about modern naval warfare. The hardest part of defeating a swarm was never sinking the boats themselves. It was forcing them to reveal their positions in the first place. For years, the Mosquito fleet had survived by hiding inside confusion. Civilian traffic, fishing vessels, hidden launch points, and the narrow geography of the Gulf all worked together as protection. But once the network exposed itself through coordinated attacks, the balance shifted rapidly. Surveillance systems, drones, reconnaissance aircraft, satellites, and precision-guided weapons transformed the battlefield into something the swarm had never been designed to survive. The same geography that once protected the attack boats now trapped them under constant observation. Every launch left a signature. Every radio transmission created a trail. Every movement across the coastline increased the risk of detection. And once that happened, even the smallest speedboat became vulnerable to overwhelming force from the air, sea, and space. The operation surrounding Silent Tide would later become a major case study in asymmetric naval warfare. Military analysts around the world examined how a superpower confronted an enemy that avoided conventional battles entirely. The lessons were clear. In modern warfare, information and surveillance could become more important than raw firepower alone. Because before an enemy can be destroyed, it first has to be found.